zero lecture. Just before Merve starts her lecture, I would like to announce that we are recruiting new speakers for the next term. So if anyone is interested in holding a paper zero lecture like this, it's open for PhD students or final year master students if you have any research that you would like to share with us, if you have any topic of interest on which you would like to hold a lecture, then just write me an email. If you're interested, it's RP598, it's my CRS ID, Robert. Just write me or write to the Facebook page of CSEP, and I'm happy to accept any applications. Or if you have a friend who's interested, just let them know. And without further ado, Merve, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, thank you for inviting me today. So I'm going to talk about basically, the question is global capitalism or models of capitalism, but I'm going to say that there is no one global capitalism, but there are models of capitalism. Which I don't know, so if this is like based on the literature, that the theory that I adopted in my PhD. I just passed my Viva on Friday. So, but then if we have time, I will also try to talk about my research a bit. So I will introduce you this research in general, and then I will skip some parts. But please ask me if you have any questions. You can interrupt me, or you can ask the questions at the end. So first, I will talk about the types of capitalism and socioeconomic outcomes, the literature that talks about these issues, and then I will talk about the critique of this literature. I will mention what is there, and then just focus on like two types of critiques, and then I will. So this literature is based on main advanced industrialized countries like Western, like European countries, basically Japan and the US, Canada, Australia. But I will see if it is possible to use this model to explain other countries as well, which is my thesis, which was a comparison between Mexico and Turkey. So because this series is called The Neglect of Neoclassical Economy, I started with that assumption, with the assumptions of neoclassical economy, and why this is problematic and how it is addressed in the literature on institutional literature. So the neoclassical economy, the neoclassical economics, they have two main assumptions. That is, individuals are profit maximizing rational actors, and then the other, what is the free market-based competition is the best, that it creates the best outcome. However, these are not really, this doesn't happen in the real world because there are individual values. People don't always act rationally, they also act on their own values. And also this is also cultural and societal characteristics that push individuals to act in some way and not the other, and not in a profit maximizing way. And also there are societal institutions which also affect individuals' economic decisions. So in the end, these actually lead individuals to have some irrational behavior, which is claimed by the institutional economist Ajamoglu. So institutions have been studied through different approaches. In the institutional economics literature, they show that free markets there are not possible, and there are actually institutions that prevent the free market. But also there are other approaches that are the rational choice approach that, which argue that that individuals create complementary institutions that exist already in the societies, and this creates certain outcomes. And the historical approach on institutions usually discuss how the institutions evolve, why these institutions exist but not others. And the sociological approach has a more general view on institutions that it's not just about regulations and institutions in the countries, but also in smaller societies and norms and values. Today I will focus on the rational choice approach and institutional complementarities and how these help us to understand today's societies. So, according to this argument, it is argued that there are certain types of institutions in countries. So this is based on countries. That this is so we can have societies, individuals, groups, family, or then regions and countries and global economy. So this argument is mostly concerned with countries, different countries, and there are certain institutions in these countries and individuals as economic rational actors. They create complementary institutions to these, and then in the end, these institutions together are complementary to each other, and they create the best outcomes, best economic outcomes. So these institutions, because they are different in different countries, they create comparative institutional advantage in certain countries compared to other countries. So there are different types of institutions, but the main ones, like in the literature that is argued, include the industrial relations system. So if the wages are based on individual contracts, or they are based on collective bargaining, like through labor unions. And the financial system, whether it is more about the options of credit and borrowing, if it is based on short-term capital accumulation or long-term, whether it allows for a long-term capital accumulation. The third one is the skill system, which is the education and training system in the countries, whether these systems generate specific skills, for example, technical vocational skills, or they generate more general skills like transferable skills that is also like as discussed especially in the UK. The other institution concerns the business associations and especially business chambers, which create the possibility of different firms to cooperate and to manage the problems of collective action. For example, I mean, I will talk about this later, but then to resolve some problems that come from the game theory concerns. And the welfare system, which also creates certain advantages to, for example, to focus on some skill systems and not others. And then in the end, all of these together create certain types of comparative advantage, not other types of comparative advantage. So these vary across different countries. I hope it's all clear. So we will talk through examples, so it will be more maybe clear to understand what I'm talking about. So the main argument, the main models of types of capitalism has been argued to be the two ideal types, which are the coordinated market economies and liberal market economies. And the coordinated market economies are, Germany is the main example in coordinated market economies, and liberal market economies, it is the US and the UK. And Germany and some other continental European countries, including Austria, Switzerland, and also Sweden and other Nordic countries. So according to this argument, I think I can actually focus maybe on the skills here. But this is where I focus my own research. So I focused on the skill systems and how the other institutions complemented the skill systems. For example, in coordinated market economies, like Germany, so there is the coordination between different economic actors, which is mostly the firms and workers, and state also comes into in the picture sometimes. They have a strategic coordination, and then the institutions in the country helps them to maintain the strategic coordination. While in the liberal market economies like the US and UK, there is no such institutions, and the coordination is mostly market-based. So in the coordinated market economies, the main institutions are the business associations, the business chambers, which help the businesses to coordinate among each other. For example, small and large businesses, they have different aims and different interests, and this kind of associations help them to kind of negotiate their interests. And also labor unions, they also help to different types of workers to negotiate, the skilled workers or unskilled workers, in terms of wage bargaining, for example. And then, for example, in terms of skills, through the labor unions, the workers can convince the firms to train workers, and then the workers accept to receive lower wages while they're in training. But both of the parts know that these workers will stay in the firm after they finish, because through the coordination through the businesses, the firms don't have the fear that their trained workers will be poached by some other firms. And so in the end, because of this, the skill system in the coordinated market economies is based on specific skill training, which is vocational and technical skills mainly. And these countries also have strong welfare systems because, especially workers, when they invest in specific skills, it is more risky than general skills because they will have higher unemployment risks. So they don't want to invest in this kind of skills unless they know that they will be employed or they will maintain their income. So that's why in coordinated market economies we see stronger employment protection and welfare system. And also the financial system in these countries is based on more long-term interests. So because of that, firms in these countries can make longer-term decisions in terms of, for example, investing in worker skills or investing in innovative activities. Therefore, in these countries it is argued that innovation is not radical but incremental because it comes through long-term. And in the end, these countries, coordinated market economies, they have comparative advantage in sectors like manufacturing, like car industry. That's why we see the German cars being very competitive in the world market compared to the American cars. They are more enduring and more quality, and it's called diversified quality production. Like, as a result of this kind of complementarity, it's argued that coordinated market economies like Germany, they become specialized in diversified quality production. We don't see this kind of institutions in the liberal market economies. Education and training is market-based. We see weak welfare systems, no coordination between businesses or workers, or between businesses and workers. In the end, the skills, because of their high risks, individuals usually invest in generating general skills when they go to school. They don't. So in liberal market economies, we don't see strong vocational education systems because it carries higher risk. So people prefer going to higher education or general lower education. In these countries, also the financing is more short-term. It's based on capital markets. It's based on short-term capital markets, and the innovation is more radical. And these countries, like the US and the UK, comparative advantage, they develop comparative advantage in sectors that require higher general skills like IT and financial services. So this is the main argument in the literature. So this is like the main creator of this argument is Holland-Soskis' 2001 book, but there are like other lots of discussion about this. But I have some graphs from their book. So they group these two models of countries. So here we see stock market capitalization and employment protection. So we see here the coordinated market economies with low stock market capitalization and high employment protection. There is Germany, Austria, France, Finland, Denmark, and Japan. Japan is very interesting. I will come to Japan. There are some other graphs that shows Japan's situation. And here on the right side, we have low employment protection and high stock market capitalization. UK, US, Canada, Australia, and other examples are usually Australia, New Zealand, Ireland sometimes. So again, this is based on the coordination of labor relations and the share of apprenticeship training. And again, here on the right side, we see the examples of coordinated market economies, including Germany, Austria, and then here on the left side, we see US, Canada. I don't think UK in this graph. I don't know where it would fit, to be honest. And here again, this is about the government transfers. So this is like to compare the welfare system and the vocational education system. So again, we see higher government transfers in coordinated market economies on the right side, and the lower government transfer on the liberal market economies on the left side. Again, Japan is interesting because in the original article original book by Holland-Soskis, Japan was classified as a coordinated market economy. But here, for example, we see it is near to more liberal market economies. But we will come to that. So it is argued that these different institutional structures, they create comparative institutional advantage, but also, so they also affect the social outcomes, like the socioeconomic outcomes in these different models of capitalism. So here, it is about the inequality levels. So we see higher inequality in liberal market economies compared to coordinated market economies. And one important element in this is the skill systems in these countries. When I say skill systems, I talk about education and training systems. In liberal market economies like the US and UK, the education system is more focused on generating general skills, so going to general schools and going to higher education. In the end, this system creates very small number of highly educated people at the one end and a big group of not highly educated group in the other end, and then there is income differences between these two groups. We see very big income differences. But in countries with strong vocational education systems, it is like we can talk about educational inequalities, but we can talk about income equalities, because people from lower income groups and lower academic records, they have the opportunity to gain some middle skills, to work in manufacturing, for example. So they have the opportunity to be more middle income rather than low income. And because the education is not that focused on generating higher skills, we see more people that is in the middle group rather than higher and lower groups in coordinated market economics. It's also like there's lots of discussion about this. We can also see in these countries like Germany, you also see people from the middle class, not from just lower class, but middle class, they also prefer vocational education, sometimes to higher education. Sometimes you see vocational education wages as high as people with higher education. So based on this book by Bussemeyer in 2015, he talks about the different types of skill systems and inequality. So we can see this is like the share of private spending on higher education and inequality. So we see again like liberal market economies. Again, Japan is a different case. But liberal market economy, we see higher inequality with higher private spending on education, higher education, while in coordinated market economies we see lower inequality with lower spending on private spending on higher education. This is again related to the vocational education, and this is a graph based on apprenticeship training. So here we see lower inequality and higher apprenticeship training, and higher inequality here and lower apprenticeship training. This is again based on the socioeconomic outcomes. This is a share of upper secondary schools in vocational education and training in the advanced industrial countries, OECD countries. We see as the share of students in upper secondary schools increase, we see lower socioeconomic inequality and lower wage inequality. So this is the main complementarity argument, and I'm just going to quickly talk about this. So this is, and the other thing is that why these different countries like the US and Germany and other countries have different institutions like business associations and labor unions while the others don't. So there's the different points in this, like it is based on more power struggles among workers, firms, and between the two groups in critical junctures. So these critical junctures are usually the industrialization and the post-industrialization period. So post-World War II, until World War II, post-World War II, and then after the 1980s. I will come to that. So I'm just going to quickly skip this part, and then the state's positions in these struggles. So whether the state aligns with the firms or the workers, or whether the state creates the institutions that can help firms or workers to coordinate among each other and between each other. And then the political parties that govern the state. For example, we can see again in the US and the UK, the conservative parties are the main parties governing, while in the left, in the coordinated market economies, we see more social democrats or conservative, the Christian democrats governing the parties. So these are the main arguments. So I will talk a bit about the critique on this kind of approach. So this approach, the complementarity approach, argues that based on because, for example, there is for example, let's say there is short-term, long-term financial financial system in coordinated market economies, then the actors went and created the other institutions that complemented this system. But the critique is that the institutions always they are not created by actors or intentionally, but they can also be contingent. So they can actually appear by accident. So this is one criticism. The main criticism is the static approach of this, approach of this view, because this is talking about certain time and certain place, but things are changing, and especially globalization. It is argued that globalization has changed these institutions in these countries that I just talked about, like the trade unions and everything. So because of that, it has been argued that this will change. The coordinated market economies can't exist anymore, and they will converge towards the liberal market economies. And another criticism is about the diversity within capitalism. So there are two types of capitalism that we talked about, coordinated market economies. But for example, can we say that, as I said, Germany and Japan, are they similar, or Germany and Sweden, are they similar? So there are actually important differences among these countries. And also within countries, like, can we say all Germany is the same, all everything in the US is the same? There could be differences among regions. And for example, in Italy, there is the industrial district, which actually on the north of Italy, which acts very different than the rest of Italy. And also the different industries. So this argument is mainly based on the manufacturing industry. So can we apply the similar kind of structure into the service industry? For example, in Germany, after the moving of all of German car companies to outside of the country, can we talk about the same thing is still existing there? And also, how many varieties can we talk about? Are there only really two varieties, or can there be more varieties? So I will now focus on the institutional change and the convergence and the varieties part. So this model is based on this model is based on the economic relations in the 20th century, which is related to manufacturing and long-term relations between stakeholders. So it is based on regular employment contracts and long-term manufacturing. For example, the car industry was the main focus. But in the 21st century, we see this has been changing. First, the service industry emerged, and then the long-term contracts have been challenged, and it is based on the employment relations were not dominated, but challenged by the short-term contracts and outsourcing and subcontracting and the precarious employment. And more recently, we have the gig economy, which actually doesn't have any employment relations, but these are based on the contractors who are supposedly independent workers. Independent contractors, they are self-employed. So these kind of things have been challenging, it is argued that they have been challenging the institutional complementarities in the coordinated market economies, causing them to move towards the liberal market economies, leaving all coordination to the market. Which is actually can be true because, for example, when we look at trade union density since the 1960s, so here we see there's an important increase. But then when we come to the end of 1980s, we see important decrease. So especially coordinated market economies like Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland, while they have especially Germany, I think this one is Germany, they experience very drastic decrease after the mid-1980s. So because of this, it has been argued that the coordinated market economy cannot exist anymore because the globalization and then the reducing and decreasing importance of the complementary institutions, for example, the trade unions. However, the institutionalists have challenged this. They oppose this because they said, yes, there is change, there is operation of global economy, but this is not causing convergence, but it is causing dualization and drift and layering of institutions in especially coordinated market economies. I will show some things later, but then, for example, in Germany, we see, even though some German manufacturing firms moved out of the country, we see the firms that are already still in Germany, they are trying to revise their vocational education structures rather than abolish the system altogether. And again, we see similar structures in Sweden. For example, in Sweden, vocational education was only based on the formal education system, but it has been revised after with the challenges of the global economy and then the increase of the precarious employment. And actually, Sweden has now, and then the other Nordic countries, they have one of the strongest continuing vocational education systems, like those systems for that address the unemployed and for their re-employment. So, so here these are the changes in terms of strictness of employment protection. So we actually see there is no convergence basically. So this is the employment protection for people in temporary contracts and regular contracts. First, we see in regular contracts there is no change happening. The change is happening to the ones with temporary contracts. And we see in Denmark and Netherlands, again, like this is like the ones in temporary contracts, their employment protection is decreasing. But the most important difference is happening in Germany, which is argued to have institutional dualization between those in temporary contracts and regular contracts, rather than institutional convergence to one liberal market economy. And similarly, the inequality levels are not also converging. So this is labor market insecurity by education level. Yes, there is different levels of insecurity for highly skilled and lowly skilled workers, and it has been changing. But again, we see the biggest change in Germany. And while the change is still there between the higher and lower skills, but they are not converging to the, for example, Belgium, Denmark, France are not converging to the models of the UK or the US, where the difference between high skilled and low skilled workers are very high. And and again, we see still liberal market economies are actually having still the highest levels of insecurity for the working population as well. So here we see the liberal market, the classic liberal market economies here, and then the Nordic economies. And here we see again Germany. I think this is because of the dualization that it has had much more changes in after the system, after the changes. And also the other argument is about how many varieties. So we talked about two models of capitalism, but there are actually, it's argued there are more than two models of capitalism, especially also even amongst the advanced industrialized countries. So there are some arguments that are 5 types of capitalisms or even more. But here, in terms of commodification of education and stratification, we can say at least 3 types of capitalism, where Japan can be actually similar to the more liberal market economies. And so this is, I'll just talk a bit more about my own research, and then we can move to the questions. So this, as I talked so far, this is all based on the case of advanced industrialized countries, which have experienced industrialization much earlier compared to other countries like China and Brazil and Turkey and Mexico. So these countries, these later industrialized in this literature, have been explained as mixed market economies with fluid or less mature institutional structures, lacking economic growth. So according to this literature, it was argued that if you have to have complementary capitalist models, for example, you should be a liberal market economy or a coordinated market economy to be able to economically successful. And if you are not, you will not be economically successful. But in the case of like the emerging economies, the so-called emerging economies, BRICS and others, shows that this is not the case. And these countries have been explained as countries in a low skills, bad jobs trap. But this, we also see like China and India, they have been challenging in terms of that. They have been increasing the skills of their workforce. So can we explain the case of the later industrializers through using the same institutional structures? So this is a new, like, I think a few months ago this paper was published. So this is the most comprehensive paper in this literature. It includes the most number of countries in their analysis. It's based on a more statistical analysis, and they actually covered the 93.5% of the world population. And they come up with 9 types of economies, 9 types of capitalisms, or whatever. But then it's interesting that they have, for example, highly coordinated economies, and they have Japan there is just one. And then while they put all of these, like, I think, very different countries in just one group. So in my research, I look at only two of them, Mexico and Turkey. So for example, in here, Mexico is grouped here as the emerging economy, and Turkey is here, it's grouped as advanced emerging economy. So I looked at if we can explain the cases, the different socioeconomic outcomes or economic growth in emerging economies based on similar institutional model. So when we look at Mexico and Turkey, they actually have very similar economic structures compared to other emerging economies, for example, like Chile. So the manufacturing of medium technology intensive goods constitutes a main comparative advantage in both countries. And manufacturing is is the main industry in both countries in terms of their GDP. It has been like that for a while. However, they also have important variations in terms of their productivity. So Turkey has been much more productive compared to Mexico. And also in terms of the GDP growth lately, especially starting in the 2000s, Turkey has had much higher GDP growth compared to Mexico. And then the real minimum wage in Turkey has been much higher than Mexico, and higher than some other Eastern European countries like Hungary and Czech Republic. And Turkey has been one of the very few OECD countries that had lower inequality levels in 2013 compared to mid-1980s. While in most OECD countries, the inequality has increased, and in Mexico, inequality has increased. I mean, Turkey still has high inequality levels, but it is interesting that it is one of the very few countries that has lower inequality than before. So I focused in my institutional analysis on the skill systems, and I looked at the vocational education systems in Mexico and Turkey and how it would affect the socioeconomic outcomes in the two countries. So this is the share of vocational education in both countries, and we see Mexico has been much lower than Turkey. And this is the public spending for vocational education. And normally vocational education is much more expensive than general education, but here we see Turkey spends more than the general education for vocational education, and much more than Mexico, while Mexico spends much more for general education than vocational education. Similarly, for retraining programs, Turkey spends much more than Mexico. This is the spending for retraining programs in Turkey. So, based on the similar institutional complementarities, I find out it is actually an important and useful way of understanding the differences between later industrializers, but the institutions are different in these countries. State is the main institution. So I talk about 5 institutions here in Turkey, 4 institutions in Mexico. But the main influence of the appearance of these institutions is the state's involvement in the economy. So in Turkey, there is the vocational education system with high state involvement, which in the end, high state involvement in terms of spending, which helps to develop, to have like that, I said this one, like almost half of the students in upper secondary schools are in vocational schools. So these students have the opportunity to move from lower income to higher income groups. And also in Turkey, there are institutions like business chambers, which allow firms to collective. This is like similar to the one in the advanced industrialized countries, which allow firms to coordinate their interests. But also with these smaller firms can also participate in these organizations and influence the decision making, which then also influence the decision making at the state level. However, in Mexico, this kind of structure doesn't exist, and all of this policy making is shaped by the interests of only large firms, large domestic firms and large foreign firms. While in Turkey, smaller firms have this, through this institutional structure, they have the mechanism to influence economic policy making. The regulations on work contracts are also important in both countries. This is like not important. They are similar, so I'm not going to go into it. Military service is an important thing in Turkey, which is And in Turkey, compulsory military service for people at the age of 24, men at the age of 20. So it affects in people's decisions in terms of their education investments, in terms of going to school, but also firms' decision in terms of hiring people that have completed their military service or haven't completed military service. And firms' location are important in both countries because in Mexico, these firms, they are all located in the outside of the city center, which are not approachable, and there is no public transport. So these workers living only around that firm go and work in that firm, and they become dependent on that firm. While in Turkey, there is important transport to firms and also by firms and also public transport. So workers are more mobile and they can actually choose to work in which firm. In the end, this affects the firm level skill practices. I'm just skipping now so that we have some time. In the end, this has these implications for firms and workers in Mexico and Turkey. In Mexico, because the vocational education is very limited, in firms, I didn't say that. I looked at only the manufacturing firms in Mexico and Turkey in the automotive industry. So we see in Mexico very hierarchical organization of workers between higher education and secondary education. And these secondary education workers cannot have limited opportunity to move up in the career ladder. While in Turkey, the hierarchy is much less. There is still some hierarchy between higher education workers and then the vocational education workers. But these vocational education workers have the opportunity even to become the plant manager. And also, so they have the important career development. And also because of the different education and training systems, in Mexico only the large firms have the opportunity to develop skilled workers, while in Turkey smaller firms can recruit these workers that are coming from the public education system. And then this kind of more general skills in Turkey, in terms of workers, they give the opportunity to firms to change and to adapt to technological changes. So in the end, we see a more segmented labor market in Mexico compared to more equal labor market in Turkey, and more segmented business and more equal, and then it also changes their upgrading opportunities. This is my second project, but I don't think we have time. And thank you. Any questions? Yeah?
Actually, in the first part of the lecture, you showed us several graphs.
Yeah.
And I think I noticed that the time scale was pretty short, in fact, which are always like 2000, mainly from 2000 to 2018, I think, mostly. How much time do we need to look at the economy to be able to observe significant changes and in trends?
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I think some of them have that. Yeah, like, I think this one is the one that 2006 that starts. But this one, for example, starts from 1990s. This one starts from 1960s. So I don't think we can say from this time to this time, but this is just the ones that, based on the data that was available and what I could create based on that. But I think, of course, like if we have a longer time span, we can see it more easily, more clearly. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we keep pushing this analysis, it seems that the conclusion will be each country should be studied differently because each of them will have different institutions, and all of this kind of characterization of capitalism, most of economies will be kind of not that meaningful. So is that the direction that we're heading to? We should be studying each country separately?
I don't think so. I mean, so these are the institutions, for example, they said. And then, for example, these institutions are the ones, or these ones, that create either strategic coordination or market-based coordination. But for example, in my case, for example, in if we talk about coordinated market economies, the institutions that create the strategic coordination in there were the trade unions and then the business associations. But for example, in Turkey's case, we see, so for example, in the coordinated market economies case, the trade unions agree with firms to employ the workers in training for lower wages, so that these people, so the firms don't spend that much money on those workers, and then the workers know that they are being trained, so they will get higher wage in the future. So this is kind of the thing that they create. So the institution is trade unions and the business associations, and then the coordination is to agree on lower wages. But for example, in Turkey, I had to skip that, but it is created by the military service. And the same thing happens, but it is not by trade unions, but it's by the military service, because the workers graduate from vocational schools at the age of 17, and they need to go to do the military service at the age of 20. So no firm wants to employ these workers for long term, because they know they're going to, or they don't want to invest in their skills because they're going to leave. And the workers know that they're going to leave for the military service. So in Turkey, military service, they need to go at the age of 20, and it lasts 15 months. So, and then they cannot work at the same time. They have to be there the whole 15 months. And because of that, the workers also wouldn't see the incentive to go to work because they're going to leave. And especially those who have the income from their family and stuff. But then this kind of thing creates the incentive for firms and for workers. So the workers accept to work in this firm for lower wages until they go to do the military service and they receive the experience and the training. And then they leave, and then they come back, and they actually start with much higher wage and as experienced workers. So that, even though the same institutions don't exist, we can find similar effects by other institutions. I think that would be mine. But then I think like Mexico looks very much similar to liberal market economies, because there is no state involvement and everything is left to the market right now. Yeah.
Is there sort of a causal factor? I very much like that you talk about these very specific factors, like the transport or the military service, because it seems very applicable. However, I think there's been like some bits of research, again mainly about European countries, where sort of large-scale aviational influences have been researched, how we have an equalization of the different economies. So say, for example, Germany and France were maybe, when Helen Toskicher wrote, could still be observed as coordinated market economies, which were very distinct from the UK and the US, have now sort of equalized the economies in many of these institutional aspects and become more similar. And then it's been proposed, I don't remember by whom, that this is that things that influence this equalization sometimes happen even on a global scale, where there's just a different economic paradigm or a different, for example, shift to short-term lending happens everywhere at the same time, because there's just a shift in how do we do finance, or we all need it because of an oil crisis or something. I was wondering what you think about these larger scale equalizations of countries.
So I think it is like more related to this. I mean, it is much recent, like 2006. It starts from 2006, but it is happening. So like the labor relations are changing in Germany or in Sweden as well. But the way that they react to that is different. So they don't react in the same way that the US or UK is reacting to it. And it is because of the current existing institutions. So in Germany, the trade unions are more exclusive than the ones in Sweden. So that's why we can see that there's more dualization in Germany, for example. While in Sweden or some other Nordic countries, the trade unions actually have managed to include the service sector workers. So there we don't see that kind of dualization. But we see the same, for example, again, the vocational education system is applied to the service sector right now as well. So I mean the challenge is the same, but I think the response is different. Yeah. Shall we?
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.